December 1942. The morning frost clings to the Tudor Gothic towers of Bagshot Park as servants move silently through corridors that have witnessed 6 decades of royal life. In the master bedroom, His Royal Highness Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, and Strathearn, third son of Queen Victoria, takes his final breath at age 91. With him dies the last living link to Victorian grandeur, the last prince who knew the empire at its zenith. The 120-room mansion, built specifically for him in 1879, stands at a crossroads. Within months, military trucks will roll through these aristocratic gates, transforming a prince's palace into an army training facility. This is the story of Bagshot Park, a royal residence that rose from Georgian foundations to become one of Britain's most architecturally ambitious Victorian palaces, survived 2 world wars, housed army chaplains for half a century, and ultimately became home to a new generation of royalty. To understand how a modest hunting lodge evolved into this architectural monument, we must journey back 3 centuries to when this Surrey heath was nothing more than wild, open country. The land before the palace. Long before red brick and stone dressings crowned this site, Bagshot Heath stretched across 50 square miles of Surrey and Berkshire, an expanse of untamed landscape that served England's monarchs as hunting grounds. The heath's strategic position, just 11 miles south of Windsor Castle, made it invaluable to the crown. Here, in this wilderness between the royal seat at Windsor and the broader realm, kings and princes could escape court ceremony for the primal pleasure of the chase. The name Bagshot itself echoes through medieval records, derived from Bagshot in 12th century documents, suggesting a landscape dotted with badgers. By the early 17th century, this heath had become royal property, designated parkland under the watchful eye of appointed keepers who maintained its game stocks and prevented poaching. On September 4, 1609, Prince Henry, eldest son of King James III and heir to 3 kingdoms, rode into Bagshot Lodge. The young prince, just 15 years old and already showing the promise that would make his early death a national tragedy, paused his journey to enjoy entertainment. The lodge's accounts record a payment of £1 to musicians who performed for him. This small detail, preserved across 4 centuries, captures the lodge's original purpose: a way station, a place of rest and refreshment between Windsor and destinations south and west. 3 years later, in 1612, King James I appointed Noel de Caron as keeper of the park. De Caron, a Dutch diplomat who served as the Dutch Republic's ambassador to England, held this largely ceremonial post until his death in 1624. The appointment reveals how royal patronage worked in Jacobean England. Positions attached to crown properties served as rewards for diplomatic service, sources of income that required little actual labour but carried considerable prestige. The transformation from simple lodge to architectural statement began in 1631, when King Charles I commissioned Inigo Jones to redesign Bagshot as part of a broader programme of royal building. Jones, who had revolutionised English architecture by introducing the classical Palladian style he had studied in Italy, approached this commission as one element in a series of small, elegant hunting lodges scattered across the royal estates. Between 1631 and 1633, Jones's workers dismantled whatever earlier structure had stood here and erected something entirely new. Unlike his grand public commissions like the Banqueting House in Whitehall or the Queen's House at Greenwich, Bagshot Lodge represented Jones's vision for intimate royal architecture. The building married classical proportions with the practical requirements of a hunting box, compact but dignified, comfortable but not ostentatious, a place where a monarch could shed the burdens of state for a few days of country life. The Civil War and subsequent Commonwealth period temporarily disrupted royal use of Bagshot, but with the restoration of Charles II in 1660, the lodge returned to its intended function. For over a century, it served successive generations of royalty and nobility as Jones had intended, a refined rural retreat, architecturally sophisticated but modest in scale. By the mid-18th century, architectural tastes had evolved far beyond Jones's restrained classicism. The Georgian era demanded grander statements, more elaborate decoration, interiors designed for entertainment rather than mere comfort. When George Keppel, 3rd Earl of Albemarle, gained use of Bagshot Park, he found Jones's 17th-century structure inadequate for modern expectations. Lord Albemarle, a military officer and diplomat who had served as British ambassador to France, understood continental sophistication. He had walked through French chateaux and Parisian hotels particuliers. Between 1766 and 1772, he engaged James Paine, one of Georgian England's most accomplished architects, to transform Bagshot into something befitting his status and experience. James Paine, born in 1717, had established his reputation through country house commissions across England. His work combined Palladian discipline with Rococo flourishes, creating interiors that balanced classical order with decorative exuberance. At Bagshot, Paine reconfigured Jones's structure, expanding rooms, heightening ceilings, adding the elaborate plasterwork and carved wood details that define Georgian taste. The transformation cost thousands of pounds, a substantial sum that reflected both Albemarle's wealth and his ambitions. Paine's Bagshot represented the Georgian ideal, rational in plan, elegant in proportion, designed for both private family life and public entertainment. Reception rooms flowed logically from entrance to state apartments. Service areas were carefully segregated from family and guest spaces. The building declared its owner's cultivation through every architectural detail. In 1798, a new resident arrived who would leave his own architectural mark, Prince William, Duke of Clarence, 3rd son of King George III. At 33, William had already lived an extraordinary life. He had joined the Royal Navy at age 13, served in the American Revolutionary War and Caribbean campaigns, risen to Rear Admiral, and developed a reputation for blunt speaking and democratic manners unusual in a prince. William engaged Sir John Soane, Britain's most innovative architect, to alter Bagshot to his requirements. Soane, appointed architect to the Bank of England and a master of neoclassical design infused with personal idiosyncrasy, approached even modest commissions with creative ambition. His alterations to Bagshot in 1798 reflected his characteristic approach: ingenious spatial manipulation, careful control of natural light, unexpected architectural effects that transformed conventional rooms into memorable experiences. Prince William resided at Bagshot until 1816, maintaining the estate as his primary country residence during years when his prospects of inheriting the throne seemed distant. He lived here with his longtime companion, the actress Dorothea Jordan, and their 10 illegitimate children, the Fitz-Clarences. This unconventional domestic arrangement, shocking to strict moralists but tolerated given William's junior royal status, made Bagshot a genuine family home, rather than a ceremonial residence. The park and gardens absorbed William's attention during these years. He walked the grounds daily, involved himself in agricultural improvements, and developed that intimate knowledge of every tree and path that long residence creates. When financial pressures eventually forced him to dismiss Mrs. Jordan and seek a legitimate marriage to produce royal heirs, Bagshot remained associated with the happiest period of his adult life. After Prince William departed Bagshot in 1816, eventually ascending the throne as King William IV in 1830, the property passed to Prince William Frederick, Duke of Gloucester, nephew of King George III. The Duke, born in 1776, had married his cousin Princess Mary, daughter of George III, in 1816, making Bagshot a residence connecting two branches of the royal family. Prince William Frederick possessed substantial private means and used them to expand Bagshot's estate. He systematically acquired properties lying between the main house and the village of Sunningdale, creating a more coherent and extensive park. These purchases, recorded in local land registries, show careful planning. Each acquisition filled gaps in the estate boundary or secured important access routes. By the time of his death in 1834, the Duke had transformed Bagshot from a discreet residence into a significant landed estate. Princess Mary continued living at Bagshot after her husband's death, maintaining the household and gardens for 13 more years. Contemporary accounts describe her as a reclusive figure in widowhood, devoted to charitable works and religious observance, venturing rarely to London court functions. The princess finally vacated Bagshot in 1847, moving to Gloucester House in London, where she died in 1857. Her departure marked the end of an era. Bagshot had been continuously occupied by members of the royal family or their widows since the Duke of Clarence's arrival nearly 50 years earlier. For 3 decades after Princess Mary's departure, Bagshot Park stood underutilised, maintained by minimal staff, its rooms closed and shuttered, except for occasional visits. The building that Inigo Jones had designed, James Paine had transformed, and John Soane had altered slowly declined. Roofs leaked, damp penetrated walls, decorative plasterwork cracked and fell. By the 1870s, informed observers agreed the house was beyond meaningful repair. To understand why the Crown decided to demolish Bagshot and construct an entirely new building, we must understand Prince Arthur, the man for whom this palace was created. Born at Buckingham Palace on May 1, 1850, Arthur William Patrick Albert was Queen Victoria, and Prince Albert's 7th child and 3rd son. His birth came at the zenith of Victorian confidence. The Great Exhibition of 1851 lay just ahead. Britain's industrial and imperial power seemed unshakable. The royal family projected an image of domestic virtue and dynastic security. Prince Albert, Arthur's father, personally supervised his son's education with characteristic Germanic thoroughness. The prince learned modern languages, mathematics, science and history under demanding tutors. But unlike his elder brother, the Prince of Wales, who chafed under educational pressure, Arthur seemed to thrive under discipline. From early childhood, he showed the qualities that would define his adult character: conscientiousness, attention to detail, physical courage, and an instinctive understanding of duty. At age 16, following his father's death in 1861, Arthur entered the Royal Military College at Woolwich, beginning a military career that would span 6 decades. He excelled at Woolwich, mastering military science, engineering and tactics. Commissioned as a lieutenant in the Royal Engineers in 1868, he served in Canada, Ireland and India, accumulating experience across the empire his mother ruled. In 1874, Arthur married Princess Louise Margaret of Prussia, a union that strengthened ties between the British and German royal families. The marriage proved personally happy and dynastically successful, eventually producing 3 children: Margaret, Arthur and Patricia. Queen Victoria, who had arranged the match with typical maternal assertiveness, approved of her daughter-in-law and looked forward to providing the young couple with an appropriate residence. By 1878, Prince Arthur, now Duke of Connaught and Strathearn following his marriage, had risen to colonel and required a permanent British residence befitting his status. He had lived in various military quarters and borrowed royal properties, but lacked a true home. Queen Victoria determined that Bagshot Park, standing derelict on Crown land, should be completely rebuilt as a residence for her favourite son. In 1877, workmen arrived at the old Bagshot Lodge with sledgehammers and crowbars. Over 18 months, they systematically dismantled the structure that had evolved across 2.5 centuries. Inigo Jones's classical walls, James Paine's Georgian additions, John Soane's neoclassical refinements, all came down, reduced to rubble and salvageable materials. Contemporary photographs, rare for this period, show the site after demolition: bare ground, scattered brick piles, mature trees standing amid desolation. The decision to demolish rather than renovate reflected Victorian confidence in progress and modernity. Why preserve outdated structures when new architecture could better serve contemporary needs? The old lodge, designed for occasional hunting visits, could never accommodate a royal duke's requirements for year-round family residence, entertaining, and the administrative apparatus that followed royalty everywhere. Queen Victoria appointed no architect through open competition. The commission went directly to a firm with proven royal credentials, though historical records frustratingly provide limited details about the specific designers. What we know with certainty, the new Bagshot Park would be constructed in the Tudor Gothic style, that peculiarly Victorian architectural language that looked backward to England's 16th century past, while incorporating modern construction techniques and conveniences. Tudor Gothic, sometimes called Victorian Tudor or Jacobean, had emerged as a favoured style for substantial country houses and institutional buildings throughout the 19th century. It evoked England's emergence as a Protestant power under the Tudors, suggested continuity with pre-Civil War tradition, and provided opportunities for picturesque effects: towers, battlements, clustered chimneys, mullioned windows, carved stonework. For a residence housing Queen Victoria's son, these associations carried powerful symbolic weight. The choice of red brick as primary building material, with stone dressings for architectural details, followed Tudor precedent while meeting practical requirements. Brick, manufactured in steam-powered kilns to consistent standards, offered durability and relatively modest cost compared to stone construction. The stone dressings, window surrounds, door frames, quoins, and decorative elements provided visual contrast and suggested craftsmanship. Ground was broken in early 1878. The construction timeline, just over 18 months from foundation to completion, seems astonishingly rapid for a 120-room palace, but Victorian building methods, when adequately funded, could achieve remarkable speed. Large teams of labourers working long days under experienced foremen and strict schedules accomplished what would take years using 21st-century regulatory processes. The workforce at peak construction likely numbered several hundred men. Skilled tradesmen, master masons, carpenters, plasterers, glaziers, commanded the respect and wages their expertise justified. These men had trained through traditional apprenticeship systems, learning techniques passed through generations. Many had worked on other significant buildings across Britain and brought accumulated knowledge to every task. Below the skilled craftsmen laboured hundreds of unskilled workers, men who dug foundations, mixed mortar, hauled bricks, cleared debris, performed the endless physical labour that construction demanded. These workers, drawn from surrounding Surrey villages and from London's vast labour pool, worked dawn to dusk for modest daily wages. Their names appear in no records. Their contribution built Bagshot Park as surely as the architect's vision. Materials arrived by the trainload. The London and South Western Railway, whose lines ran near Bagshot, delivered brick by the hundreds of thousands, timber by the ton, slate for roofing, lead for plumbing, glass for windows, iron for structural elements. Specialised suppliers provided carved stonework, Caen stone from Normandy for fine architectural details, Portland stone for more substantial elements, local sandstone for foundations and less visible work. The building that emerged by late 1879 presented a formidable sight. The principal facade, facing south across landscaped grounds, extended over 200 feet, 3 full stories, plus attics under steeply pitched roofs. At each end, square towers rose an additional story, their battlemented parapets suggesting fortress more than country house. Between the towers, the main facade displayed the asymmetrical composition characteristic of Tudor Gothic, projecting bays, varied window arrangements, a massive entrance porch with carved stone surrounds. The red brick walls, laid in Flemish bond with alternating header and stretcher courses, achieved the rich, textured surface that Victorian builders prized. Stone dressings provided crisp contrast, pale grey Portland stone framing dark mullioned windows, carved labels above openings, battlements defining the roofline. Tall chimneys, clustered in groups and elaborately crenellated, punctuated the skyline, suggesting the numerous fireplaces heating rooms throughout the building. Entering Bagshot Park in 1880 meant experiencing the Victorian interpretation of aristocratic living. The entrance hall, deliberately imposing to establish immediate grandeur, soared 2 stories high. Dark oak panelling lined walls, carved with linen fold patterns echoing genuine Tudor work. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its overmantel rising nearly to ceiling height, decorated with heraldic shields representing Connaught and Prussian arms. The floor, laid in black and white marble squares creating geometric patterns, reflected light from gas chandeliers hanging on heavy chains. A broad oak staircase rose along one wall, its newel posts topped with carved beasts, the British lion, Prussian eagle, Tudor dragon. Every detail proclaimed status, permanence, dynastic ambition. From the entrance hall, doors opened to principal reception rooms, arranged enfilade along the south facade. The drawing room, intended primarily for the Duchess of Connaught's use and for ladies retiring after dinner, measured approximately 40 feet by 30 feet. 3 tall windows overlook the south terrace and gardens beyond. The ceiling, plastered with elaborate geometric patterns based on Tudor and Elizabethan precedents, rose 15 feet. Walls, probably hung with silk damask in fashionable colours, perhaps deep crimson or forest green, provided background for paintings, mirrors in gilt frames, console tables bearing porcelain and sculpture. Furniture in the drawing room would have followed late Victorian taste. Substantial pieces upholstered in rich fabrics, carved wood frames showing French and Italian Renaissance influence, occasional tables scattered throughout for convenient placement of teacups, books, needlework. A grand piano, probably a Steinway or Bechstein, occupied one corner. The Duchess played competently, and musicales provided regular entertainment. The dining room, accessible through double doors from the drawing room, accommodated formal dinners for 30 or more guests. A massive oak table, capable of extension to 20 feet length, dominated the centre. Around it stood enough chairs to seat diners in the relatively intimate arrangement Victorians preferred, with serving done from sideboards along walls rather than by servants weaving between closely packed seats. The walls, lightly panelled in dark oak with carved pilasters and cornices, created an atmosphere of masculine solemnity appropriate to this room where men lingered over port and cigars while ladies withdrew. A sideboard of monumental proportions, perhaps 12 feet long with multiple tiers of carved shelving, displayed the family's silver and held serving pieces during meals. Gas sconces along walls supplemented light from the chandelier hanging above the table's centre. But the most remarkable interior space at Bagshot Park, the room that made this building architecturally significant beyond typical Victorian country house accomplishment, stood separate from the main block, the Indian billiard room wing. Prince Arthur's service in India between 1886 and 1890, commanding British forces in the Bombay Presidency, exposed him to subcontinental architecture and decorative arts at their zenith. The late 19th century represented the peak of Indo-Saracenic style, British architects and Indian craftsmen collaborating to create buildings that merged European structural engineering with Indian decorative vocabulary. The Duke encountered palace complexes, public buildings and private residences where carved teak, pierced marble screens, painted ceilings and inlaid floors created environments of almost hallucinatory richness. During this Indian sojourn, the Duke met John Lockwood Kipling, father of Rudyard Kipling, and himself an accomplished artist, designer, and administrator. Lockwood Kipling served as principal of the Mayo School of Art in Lahore and curator of the Lahore Central Museum. He had spent decades studying Indian craft traditions, working with hereditary artisans, and promoting decorative arts that merged Indian techniques with contemporary design principles. When Prince Arthur conceived of adding a billiard room to Bagshot Park, he approached Lockwood Kipling with an unusual commission: design a complete room in authentic Indian style, to be fabricated in India by traditional craftsmen and shipped to England for installation. Kipling embraced the challenge, recognizing an opportunity to showcase Indian artistry before British aristocracy. The project took 2 years, from approximately 1883 to 1885. In workshops in Lahore and possibly other northern Indian cities, teams of carpenters, stone carvers, metalworkers and painters created the billiard room's components under Lockwood Kipling's supervision. Carpenters fashioned teak panels, carved with intricate geometric and floral patterns drawn from Mughal palace decoration. Stone carvers created pierced marble screens allowing ventilation while maintaining privacy, their designs based on examples from Delhi and Agra monuments. Painters prepared canvas ceiling panels with elaborate patterns using traditional mineral pigments and gold leaf. When components were complete, they were carefully crated and shipped to England, probably via Bombay to British ports, then overland to Bagshot. The crate's arrival must have created local sensation, mysterious boxes bearing exotic markings, contents that rumour magnified into treasures. Installation required bringing Indian craftsmen to England, men who understood how the components fit together according to traditional joinery methods. These artisans, probably numbering 10 to 15, travelled halfway around the world to Surrey, where they lived in a tent pitched on Bagshot's grounds throughout construction. One imagines their reactions to English autumn weather, to country landscapes utterly unlike their homeland, to the challenge of working in an alien environment. The completed billiard room created an environment transporting visitors instantly from English Surrey to Lahore palaces. Teak panelling covered walls from floor to ceiling, its carved surfaces catching light and creating texture that plain walls could never achieve. The ceiling, composed of painted canvas panels set in carved wood frames, depicted floral and geometric patterns in colours dominated by deep blues, ruby reds, and burnished gold. Pierced marble screens filtered light from tall windows, creating ever-changing patterns as the sun moved. The billiard table itself, a full-sized championship table by Thurston or similar premier maker, occupied the room's centre. Gas lamps, probably with elaborate brass fixtures, hung above the table, providing the strong, even illumination serious players required. Around the walls stood seating, carved chairs with cushions, perhaps benches along one wall, small tables for holding drinks and cigars. This Indian billiard room represented something unique in British architecture, not colonial appropriation of superficial exotic motifs, but careful recreation of authentic Indian interior architecture by actual Indian craftsmen using traditional methods. It was a gift from Indian princes to the Duke and Duchess of Connaught, celebrating Arthur's service and the complex relationships binding India's rulers to the British crown. As such, it carried political as well as artistic significance, embodying the Victorian imperialist belief that Britain and India, ruler and ruled, had achieved some synthesis greater than either alone. The billiard room's fame spread quickly among Britain's elite. Visitors to Bagshot specifically requested to see it, marvelling at craftsmanship and authenticity. Queen Victoria herself visited and approved, pleased that her son had commemorated his Indian service so creatively. The room's influence extended beyond Bagshot. It directly inspired the Durbar Room added to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, Queen Victoria's beloved retreat in 1890-1891. The Osborne Durbar Room, more famous today because more visitors see it annually, nonetheless followed Bagshot's pioneering example. The 1881 census, taken in April of that year, just 18 months after the house's completion, provides remarkably detailed information about Bagshot Park's household composition. These census returns, filled out by householders and preserved in national archives, offer snapshots of Victorian domestic life unmatched by any other source. Living in the main house that census night were 27 people beyond the Duke and Duchess themselves, one equerry, who served as the Duke's military aide-de-camp and personal assistant, and 26 servants. This ratio, 29 people serving a household of at most 5 or 6 family members, seems extraordinary to modern sensibilities, but typified aristocratic and royal establishments. The servant hierarchy began with the under-butler. The position of under-butler, ranking immediately below the butler who actually managed the household, involved supervising male servants, overseeing dinner service, managing the wine cellar, and deputizing in the butler's absence. The under-butler at Bagshot in 1881 was probably in his late 20s or early 30s, experienced enough for responsibility but not yet eligible for a butler's position at a great house. The housekeeper ranked equally with the under-butler in household precedence. She controlled female servants, managed household supplies, oversaw housekeeping operations, and kept accounts of expenditures. In large establishments, housekeepers occupied comfortable private sitting rooms and commanded respect from all servants. The Bagshot housekeeper in 1881 supervised a substantial female staff and managed a household budget running to hundreds of pounds annually for supplies alone. 4 valets served the Duke and male family members and guests. Victorian gentlemen required valets to maintain wardrobes, assist with dressing, care for boots and shoes, and perform countless personal services. A royal duke, with military uniforms, court dress, sporting clothes, and everyday wear, generated wardrobe requirements demanding multiple skilled valets. 2 ladies' maids attended the Duchess. Ladies' maids dressed hair, assisted with elaborate Victorian women's clothing, maintained wardrobes, and accompanied their mistresses when travelling. The position required technical skill, discretion, and patience, qualities that commanded relatively high wages and status within servant hierarchies. 2 dressers supplemented the ladies' maids, probably specialising in maintaining specific categories of clothing or assisting during particular activities. The distinction between lady's maid and dresser involved both status and specific duties, part of the elaborate specialisation characterising large Victorian households. The cook, probably a woman despite cook being used as a title for both genders in census returns, managed kitchen operations. She planned menus in consultation with the duchess or housekeeper, supervised kitchen staff, and personally prepared dishes requiring greatest skill. Victorian haute cuisine, heavily influenced by French models, demanded technical expertise. Elaborate sauces, multi-course dinners, decorative presentations, and precise timing. 3 kitchen maids assisted the cook, probably a first kitchen maid with considerable skill, a second kitchen maid learning more advanced techniques, and a third kitchen maid performing basic preparation tasks. In Bagshot's kitchen during dinner party preparations, these women worked amid heat, steam, and pressure, producing elaborate meals for dozens of diners. 3 housemaids, ranked first, second, and third, cleaned public and private rooms, made beds, maintained fires, and performed endless physical labour. Housemaid work was exhausting. Victorian houses generated continuous dirt from coal fires, required constant dusting and polishing, and expected floors, windows, and brass fittings to gleam. 3 footmen, also ranked hierarchically, performed numerous duties, answering doors, serving at table, attending on family members, delivering messages, and providing the visible male presence that formal households required. Footmen typically were chosen partly for height and appearance. They wore elaborate livery and represented the household to visitors. A page, probably a teenage boy, ran errands, delivered messages within the house, and performed miscellaneous tasks. The page position often served as entry to household service, an opportunity for young men to learn skills and rise through servant ranks. The porter, stationed at the main entrance, controlled access to the house, received deliveries, and provided security. In a house like Bagshot, located somewhat remote from towns, the porter's role included substantial responsibility for the estate's security perimeter. A scullery maid, lowest in kitchen hierarchy, washed pots and pans, cleaned kitchen floors, and performed the dirtiest, most physically demanding kitchen work. Scullery maids worked long hours in hot, wet conditions for minimal wages, hoping eventually to advance to housemaid or kitchen maid positions. 2 additional junior servants, their specific roles unrecorded in census summaries, probably included positions like lamp boy, responsible for cleaning and maintaining oil lamps, boot boy, cleaning and polishing shoes and boots for the entire household, or still room maid, managing preserves, jams, and light meal preparations. 1 soldier, his presence reflecting the Duke's military connections, lived in the main house, probably serving as military orderly or bodyguard. Beyond the main house staff, a coachman and 7 grooms lived in the stable buildings. The stables at a ducal residence like Bagshot housed riding horses for family members, carriage horses for various vehicles, formal state carriages, lighter carriages for country drives, practical vehicles for estate business, and probably hunters for the Duke's use during hunting seasons. 7 grooms represented minimum staffing for such an establishment. Horses required grooming, feeding, and exercising daily. Tack needed cleaning and maintenance. Vehicles required washing and repair. Stable buildings demanded constant upkeep. 2 domestic staff lived in one of the estate's lodges, probably entrance lodges where gatekeepers resided to control access to the property. 3 agricultural workers occupied another lodge, managing home farm operations, the kitchen gardens supplying vegetables and fruit, possibly dairy cattle, poultry and pigs. 1 gardener, though surely not the only one, estate grounds of this scale required multiple gardeners, lived somewhere on the property, maintaining ornamental gardens, lawns and pleasure grounds. This census snapshot reveals a household of perhaps 40 people when complete staffing is considered, all supporting a family of at most 6 people. The wage bill alone probably exceeded £500 annually, plus food, accommodation and uniforms for servants. Operating Bagshot Park as a royal residence required resources that only Crown support could sustain. Daily life at Bagshot followed patterns established by aristocratic convention and the Duke's military discipline. The household rose early, servants beginning work before 6 a.m. to prepare fires, heat water, and ready the house before family members stirred. The Duke, maintaining military habits throughout his life, typically rose around 7 a.m., dressed with his valet's assistants, and took breakfast by 8 a.m. Breakfast at Victorian country houses was substantial. A sideboard laden with hot dishes kept warm in chafing dishes, eggs prepared various ways, bacon, kidneys, kippers, sausages, cold meats, bread and toast, butter and preserves, tea and coffee. Family members and any house guests served themselves informally, a welcome contrast to dinner's elaborate service. Mornings were dedicated to business. The Duke attended to military correspondence, estate management, and royal duties. He met with his equerry to review schedules, received reports from estate managers, read dispatches from London. The Duchess managed household affairs, consulting with the housekeeper about menus and supplies, reviewing accounts, dealing with domestic matters, and handling the substantial correspondence that women of her status maintained. Luncheon around 1 p.m. was lighter than breakfast or dinner, cold meats, salads, perhaps a hot soup or savoury. After lunch, depending on weather and season, the Duke might ride or walk the estate, inspect farm operations, or pursue sporting activities. The Duchess received visitors, worked on charitable projects, or engaged in appropriate hobbies: watercolour painting, needlework, reading. Tea at 4 or 5 p.m. brought household members together, tea served with thin sandwiches, cakes and pastries. This meal, particularly important in households with women, provided an opportunity for conversation, music and family intimacy. Dinner, the day's principal meal and social event, was served around 8 p.m. When the family dined alone, the meal might be relatively simple, 4 or 5 courses served over 90 minutes, but Bagshot frequently entertained guests, and formal dinners expanded to 8 or more courses extending across 3 hours. Formal dinner service followed strict protocols. Guests assembled in the drawing room before dinner was announced. They processed to the dining room in order of precedence, the Duke escorting the highest-ranking lady present, other guests paired appropriately by rank. In the dining room, guests found their places according to a seating plan carefully arranged to balance rank, acquaintance and conversation possibilities. Footmen, wearing full livery, served each course from the left, removed plates from the right. The elaborate choreography of formal service required training and practice. Wrong-side service or reaching across guests was unthinkable. Diners worked through soups, fish courses, meat courses, multiple preparations, vegetable dishes, sweets and savouries, each course accompanied by appropriate wines. After dinner, ladies withdrew to the drawing room while men remained at table for port, cigars and conversation. This gendered segregation, lasting perhaps 30 to 45 minutes, allowed masculine talk freed from female presence's constraints. Eventually, men rejoined ladies in the drawing room for coffee, tea, music, conversation or cards. Households retired around 11 p.m. or midnight, servants having already laid out nightclothes and prepared bedrooms. This daily rhythm, repeated with minor variations throughout the year, shaped life for everyone at Bagshot: family, guests and servants. It created a predictable pattern that allowed a complex household to function smoothly, where dozens of people living in close quarters could coexist through clearly defined roles and expectations. Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, lived at Bagshot Park for 62 years. He witnessed the Victorian and Edwardian eras, survived World War I, during which he lost his son, Prince Arthur of Connaught, in 1942, served as Governor-General of Canada from 1911 to 1916, and maintained military connections until extreme old age. By the time he died in January 1942 at age 91, he had outlived most of his generation. He was the last surviving child of Queen Victoria, the last prince who remembered the mid-Victorian world. His death occurred during the Second World War's darkest period. Britain stood embattled, her cities bombed, her resources strained, her very survival uncertain. In this context, maintaining a 120-room ducal residence for one elderly man seemed increasingly unjustifiable. The Crown had continued Bagshot as grace and favour accommodation for the Duke, but his death removed any reason to preserve the status quo. Within months of the Duke's funeral, the army arrived. Bagshot Park was requisitioned as headquarters for the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the women's branch of the British Army. The ATS used Bagshot as their staff college, training officers and specialists in this building designed for elegance and entertainment. Reception rooms became classrooms and offices. Bedrooms housed training officers. The famous Indian billiard room likely served as conference space. Imagine the transformation. A palace built for one family with 40 servants now housing dozens or hundreds of military women. The careful maintenance that had preserved Bagshot for decades gave way to institutional use. Damage accumulated. Floors scratched by office furniture, walls scarred by notice boards, plumbing and heating systems stressed by intensive use. The Second World War ended in 1945. The ATS Staff College closed soon after, leaving Bagshot Park vacant once more. The building, now showing war years' wear, faced an uncertain future. The post-war Labour government, dealing with massive housing shortages and economic crisis, had little interest in maintaining expensive royal properties. In 1946, King George VI made a decision that saved Bagshot Park from likely demolition or decay. He offered the house to the Royal Army Chaplains Department as their church house and chaplains depot. The Chaplains Department, having outgrown their previous accommodations, accepted gratefully. From 1947, Bagshot Park housed army chaplains of all Christian denominations serving British forces. The house became administrative headquarters, training centre, and residence for chaplains between postings. This use, though humble compared to its royal origins, gave Bagshot purpose and ensured its maintenance. The chaplains famously placed a sign by the ornamental pond reading, "Please do not walk on the water." This gentle biblical humour, typical of military chaplains' self-deprecating wit, became Bagshot Park's best-known feature during these decades. The sign remained until the chaplains departed in 1996, a small detail that thousands of people remembered. The chaplains' tenure lasted 49 years, nearly as long as the Duke of Connaught's residence. They maintained the building reasonably well given limited resources, preserved its basic character, and created their own institutional culture within these Victorian walls. But by the 1990s, the Army Chaplains Department needed more modern facilities. In April 1996, they relocated to Andover, Hampshire, leaving Bagshot Park vacant once more. Prince Edward, Earl of Wessex, youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II, married Sophie Rhys-Jones in June 1999. The couple required a residence suitable for their status, yet not impossibly expensive to maintain. Bagshot Park, vacant since the chaplain's departure and increasingly dilapidated, presented possibilities. In March 1998, before the marriage, the Crown Estate leased Bagshot Park to Prince Edward for 50 years. The lease included the main house, a stable block, and Sunningdale Lodge. Commercial farmland and woodland remained under Crown Estate direct management. The financial arrangements were carefully structured to address public sensitivity about royal expenses. The initial rent was set at just $5,000 annually, but this reflected the property's poor condition. Extensive renovations were required before the house could serve as a residence. The Crown Estate agreed to contribute $1.6 million toward renovation costs, with Prince Edward responsible for any additional expenses. Original estimates put total renovation costs at $218 million, meaning Prince Edward would pay $580,000 beyond the Crown Estate's contribution. However, as renovations progressed, costs increased substantially. The National Audit Office, which scrutinised the transaction to ensure appropriate use of public funds, reported final costs reached $298 million. The Crown Estate paid its committed $1.6 million. Prince Edward paid the excess of $138 million, significantly more than initially expected. After renovation, the annual rent increased to $90,000, subject to 15-year reviews linked to the retail price index. This arrangement meant Prince Edward paid market-rate rent for a substantial country house, though the Crown Estate's renovation contribution effectively subsidised the initial improvements. The lease agreement permitted Prince Edward to sublet the stable block, potentially generating income to offset his rental costs. This flexibility recognised that few modern families, even royal ones, require Victorian stable complexes for horses and carriages. Renovation work updated Bagshot Park for 21st century living while preserving historic character. Modern plumbing and electrical systems replaced Victorian installations. Central heating was improved or installed throughout. Kitchens and bathrooms were modernised. But the principal rooms, entrance hall, drawing room, dining room, and crucially the Indian billiard room, retained their historic features. The Earl and Countess of Wessex moved into Bagshot Park around 2000 and have resided there since. They raised their 2 children, Lady Louise Windsor and James, Viscount Severn, in this house. For the first time since 1942, Bagshot Park has served its designed purpose, home to a royal family. The house remains private, not open to public tours. Only occasional photographs released by the royal family show glimpses of interiors. The Indian billiard room, that unique architectural treasure, is preserved but rarely photographed. Bagshot Park has returned to quiet private life, its historic role as royal residence continuing into a new century. Bagshot Park occupies a curious position in British architectural history. It is not celebrated like Blenheim Palace, not visited like Chatsworth, not studied like Osterley Park. The architectural historian Nicholas Pevsner, surveying Surrey buildings for his monumental county-by-county architectural guides, dismissed Bagshot as ugly, reflecting mid-20th century prejudice against Victorian architecture. Yet careful assessment reveals Bagshot's significance. It represents the most architecturally ambitious royal residence created after Prince Albert's death in 1861. Queen Victoria built or extensively renovated several residences during her widowhood: Balmoral, Osborne, Windsor Castle, but these were established properties. Bagshot was built from foundations specifically for Prince Arthur, embodying late Victorian ideas about royal architecture. The choice of Tudor Gothic style, executed with remarkable confidence and substantial budget, created a building that deliberately invoked English architectural heritage while incorporating modern conveniences. Unlike earlier Gothic revival work by Pugin or Barry, which often aimed at archaeological accuracy, Bagshot's Tudor Gothic was frankly Victorian, picturesque, asymmetrical, prioritising visual effect over historical precision. The Indian billiard room represents something rarer, authentic cross-cultural artistic collaboration producing significant architecture. While Victorian Britain was full of oriental rooms using superficial exotic motifs, Bagshot's Indian billiard room was actual Indian architecture, created by Indian craftsmen using traditional methods. It preceded and inspired similar efforts, including the famous Osborne Durbar Room, and documents the complex cultural exchanges characterising British imperial relationships. Bagshot's survival through the 20th century, when so many comparable Victorian country houses were demolished, reflects both luck and the building's royal connections. Many great Victorian houses fell to demolition between 1918 and 1970. Taxation, changing social structures, and lack of modern amenities made them unsustainable. Bagshot survived because Crown ownership provided continuous purpose, military use during and after World War II, chaplains' occupation for 5 decades, and finally returned to royal residential use. The building's Grade II listing in 1976 recognised its architectural and historic importance, protecting it from demolition or unsympathetic alteration. The surrounding landscape grounds also received Grade II listing on the Register of Historic Parks and Gardens, acknowledging the designed landscape's contribution to the overall composition. Standing at Bagshot Park's gates today, one sees a red brick Victorian pile rising beyond manicured lawns and mature trees. Solid, substantial, slightly forbidding. The Tudor Gothic silhouette, towers, battlements, clustered chimneys, creates that deliberately historic effect Victorian architects prized. It looks backward to an imagined English past, while serving contemporary royal life. This building's history encapsulates 4 centuries of British royal and architectural history. From the hunting lodge where Prince Henry heard musicians in 1609, through Inigo Jones's classicism and Georgian grandeur, to the Victorian palace built for Queen Victoria's son, Bagshot Park has continuously adapted to changing requirements while remaining recognisably itself, a royal residence on Surrey Heath. The Indian billiard room, hidden within Victorian walls, reminds us that this building documents empire as well as monarchy, the relationships binding Britain and India, the cultural exchanges flowing both directions, the craftsmanship that transcended imperial hierarchies. Those Indian artisans who lived in a tent on these grounds, while installing carved teak panels, left an artistic monument that survives 140 years later. That Bagshot Park houses royalty again, that Prince Edward and his family live here, children playing in gardens where Queen Victoria's grandchildren once played, suggests history's continuities as much as its changes. The Victorian era that created this building seems impossibly distant. Gas lamps, Victorian dress, servants living according to rigid hierarchies. Yet the fundamental purpose remains, a home for members of Britain's royal family. Bagshot Park will never attract the tourist crowds visiting Windsor Castle or Balmoral. It remains private, glimpsed from public roads, but not entered by the curious. Perhaps this privacy, this continuing residential purpose, represents the building's greatest achievement, not as museum piece, but as lived-in home, adapting across generations while maintaining connection to the Victorian vision that created it. In this sense, Bagshot Park succeeds in ways its Victorian builders could appreciate. It endures, it serves, it persists.